hello again. My name is Annie Friedman. I'm with Yale School of Medicine, Department of Public Health, class of 1978, and an active member of 1stGenYale and class agent. We'd like to welcome you to Plan to Prosper at Yale and Beyond, our inaugural personal financial planning series, which is co-sponsored by three very special organizations: the Yale Club of Washington, D.C., the Yale Latino Alumni Network, and Yale Fin alumni and students. This presentation has been designed for all our alumni and students at Yale. Tonight's audience includes our Yale College representation from our Yale College and from our graduate and professional schools, comprised of a broad and diverse background from across the country and also internationally. But I'd like to begin by a quick shout out to the first generation of Yale DC chapter, led by Barb Portacchio. And I also want to recognize the hard work that Folake Fadayomi has done in putting and helping us put this program together. With that, I'd like to move into some of the specifics about our program. Over the last 2 years, many members of our 1stGenYale community have asked us to host a program that discusses personal financial planning. So we're here tonight. We're delighted to present this third in a series program. Our personal financial planning theme for this evening is really exciting: saving for retirement. During this session, what we want to do is explore and learn about strategies available to grow your wealth, no matter what your income level is. So we want to give you some nice tips and some guidance in some educational materials that will help you through your financial journey. Whether you are 18 or 58, no matter what your age, you can take steps toward a better, more secure future. Personally, I like to think myself as an architect of my own financial future, and I hope you'll take my lead on that. And what I like to do is look at my financial future, wellness, and giving me an opportunity to make freedom of my own choices by having financial freedom over time. By the way, if you missed the first two sessions that we have been presenting in this series, we encourage you to check out the recordings on our 1stYale YouTube channel, our 1stGen YouTube channel. With introductions tonight, it's my privilege to introduce our panelists. Elisabeth Anton, class of 1989, Silliman, with an MBA in finance from Wharton Business School. Elisabeth is the founder and president of Sherwood Financial Group. She is a licensed investment advisor representative with a Series 7, Series 63, and Series 65. Her vast banking experience includes Merrill Lynch of London, Credit Suisse of Madrid, and the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation of Dubai. Additionally, Elisabeth has been an active member of the 1stGenYale since the inaugural conference in 2018. Now I'd like to turn our attention to introducing Albert Lee, the class of 2022 and recent grad. He is a proud FGLI student with a dual major in economics and computer science. Albert also works as a paraprofessional for Sherwood Financial Group. We are so proud to have Albert here today, and we also are really thrilled to congratulate him on his recent graduation. Before I turn the program over to Elisabeth and Albert and team, I need to review with you the compliance requirements, just so everybody has an understanding. Elisabeth Anton offers securities and advisory services through Centauras Financial Inc., member FINRA, FIPC, a registered registered investment advisor. This is not an offer to sell securities, which may be done only after proper delivery of a prospectus and client suitability is reviewed and determined. Information relating to securities is intended for use by individuals residing in Connecticut, California, Washington, D.C., Massachusetts, Virginia, New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Indiana, and Michigan. Sherwood Financial Group and Centaurus Financial Inc. are not affiliated. 1stGenYale and the co-sponsors do not give an opinion or recommendation as to these services. It is now my pleasure for us to jump into tonight's session with Elisabeth and the team. Over to you, Elisabeth. What I'd like to ask, though, in my first question is if you could share a little bit of your background. And I also think it would be great for this group, because it was so inspirational for me personally to understand that at this point in your life, you've made a major transition, and you're in your second career, taking advantage of everything you've done up to this point and now applying it to help individuals like ourselves and members of the group. So with that, it's over to you, Elisabeth.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you so much. I am honored to be here, and I want to thank first Lisa Chapman for organizing this amazing series and for reaching out to me during that 2018 First Gen conference, where I sat quietly listening to everyone's stories all day and never said a word because I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, I was going to cry. And Lisa Chapman took me by the hand and said, "You belong." So thank you, Lisa Chapman. Thank you, Albert. Albert, I'm so proud to have you working with me, and so proud of you being just the amazing person you are. Folake, I hope you travel well. I'm so sorry that your flight got delayed. But thank you, Folake, for all of your support and the wonderful addition to this team that you are. So, and Annie, thank you so much for stepping in at the last minute. So with that, I can first say that this is actually my fourth career, not my second career. I started first as a professor. I taught literature for a number of years before I went to business school, and became a banker. And then when I left banking, I wrote for a number of years until the pandemic. When I came back to New Haven about 4 years ago to work on a writing project for Yale. And the writing project was sort of starting and stopping for a bit, and then the pandemic hit. And I'll never forget, about a week after lockdown, I woke up and I thought, oh my goodness, I can't spend the next God knows how long writing. I need to do something. I need to help. And it occurred to me that even though I'm not a doctor or a nurse or a physician's assistant, that I have finance skills, rusty as they were. And with finance skills, I could really help people, because I saw quickly, I suppose like we all did, that the people who would be hardest hit were the underserved communities that always get hit the hardest. And I promised myself that if I got back into the business, that I was going to do it because I wanted to help those people who never get the benefit of advisory. And so here I am, and here is Sherwood Financial Group. So that's sort of how I got here. I've already talked about, I guess, my career background, but I think what a lot of people don't know about me is that I am a very proud first-gen low-income graduate of Yale. I was born into a Cuban, Puerto Rican, Ecuadorian family in the Bronx. My grandparents didn't speak English. They didn't know how to read or write. And my father left when I was very young. So it was my mother who kept food on the table. I know what it's like to eat lentil soup for 4 or 5 days in a row at the end of the month. So we moved to Puerto Rico when I was a child. I moved back here for Yale, and back then in the 80s there was no first gen for support. So it was a rough passage. It was deep culture shock. But I made it through, and I am very proud to be here today with all of you. So with that, let me just go into our agenda. So I thought we'd start with looking at some of the sources of income for retirement, where your income is going to come from when you retire. We thought we'd talk a little bit about Social Security, since it is a fundamental part of retirement. We will delve into employer retirement savings plans and individual retirement savings plans. We'll talk a little bit about target date funds, and then a bit about tax diversification. So I would really be grateful if you could put your questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll have plenty of time at the end to answer questions. Okay, so I found these two graphs, which kind of blew my mind a little bit. The one on the left, so these are the general sources of your retirement income. And I got both of these graphs from Social Security Administration. The graph on the left was done in 2010, and the graph on the right was done in 2017. And this is what surprised me and worried me a little bit. So as you can see, Social Security back 10 years ago made up about 27% of the average American retirement income pie. Average American being defined as a median income of, I think, about $58,000 a year. I think that's the median income of in America. And so given all of the hype around Social Security, it would have seemed to me that years later, people would have depended on Social Security less. But what I found is that they actually your average American depends on Social Security more than they did in 2010. You can see in 2017, it was 33% of the total pie. If you look on the left, you can see IRA is 8%, 401k is 7%, which makes up about 15%, right? And that would be equivalent to the savings and investments, which has gone down. And this is what surprised me, is that I thought with the advent of 401ks and IRAs that portion of retirement income would have grown. It has not. It has diminished. You can see on the left, pensions, 18% your company pension, 7% your spouse's pension. That's 25%? And you can see pensions have shrunk, and that I expected. That I expected, but what I did not expect at all, and what worries me, is the part-time work. You can see on the left-hand side that part-time work accounted for about 7% of your retirement income. It accounts for 34% back in 2017. That is huge. That means that people are having to work during retirement. That your income comes about a third from Social Security, about a third from your 401ks and your pensions, and about a third from your actual part-time earnings. I don't know about you, but I'm not happy about that. Go ahead, Annie.
So, Elizabeth, on that particular point, is there something that you're suggesting that we think about as we're planning? I know that, that percentage means that not very much money is being set aside for retirement. Does that mean that we should start thinking about it earlier, more often, doing different kinds of things? As we go through, maybe there's some things that we can point out that might be helpful to change this story for us individually.
Well, I hope that this entire presentation will be about growing that 9% piece of the pie, your savings and investments. This is what this presentation is about. And Annie, the simple answer to your question is you must start as soon as you get a job in your early to mid 20s. You must start thinking about saving for retirement. There are a variety of vehicles and strategies that you can use even when you're making small salaries, when you first graduate from college. So I hope that that this presentation will kind of shed some light on what you can do starting right now to grow that piece of the pie so that you don't have to work in your retirement. Okay. So I thought we'd talk about Social Security since it continues to be a significant chunk of people's retirement income. This graph on the left, again from Social Security, and this was in 2018, shows what Social Security pays typical Americans. And again, a typical American is a family that makes about $58,000, which is the median income, 58 and change. So you can see that the monthly benefit for retired workers, people who've worked a good, 30 years, 40 years, is less than $1,500. If you're a spouse of a retiree, you get $739. If you're a surviving spouse, you get $1,347. So you can see if you're a surviving child, if your father or your mother dies, you as a minor will get $859. A disabled worker gets about $1,200. So you can see that these amounts, this is monthly, but these amounts are not huge. And of course it's all relative, but I know here in Connecticut, it would be very difficult if I were the spouse of a retiree to live on $800 a month. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the myths around Social Security and maybe and give you some facts to counteract those. I know people talk all the time, you hear it, it's very sensationalized and it's very politicized actually. You hear in the news all the time that Social Security is about to implode and that it's underfunded and that, we are risking never getting any Social Security at all. And I really, I don't believe any of that. I think that Social Security, as flawed a system as it is, will endure and will form the foundation of our retirement system, our retirement income for generations to come. That'll change. I think there are changes that are inevitable, but I think it's kind of fear mongering and politicized to sort of talk about the end of Social Security. So one myth is that Social Security will provide most of the income you need in retirement. I hope you've already understood that that's not the case. It's most likely going to provide a much smaller portion of your retirement income. Having said that, 90% of individuals in this country, 65 and above, receive Social Security. So changes are afoot, and the younger and wealthier that you are, the more those changes will impact you. So those of you who are in your 20s and 30s will probably receive less Social Security as a percentage of your total retirement pie than people who are retiring in 5 years. So Social Security is not a primary savings vehicle. I would see it more as a supplement. Um, let's see. No, Social Security is only retirement program. This is not true. We think of Social Security as simply retirement, but actually it provides long-term disability, and it provides survivor's insurance. So if me as the breadwinner, if I were to die, members of my family would be eligible for survivor benefits. You can see survivor. So that's actually a big deal. And also, if I became disabled as the primary breadwinner in my family and me are eligible for disability payments. So it's the system is more than just retirement, and I think it's important to remember that. Earning money after you retire makes you lose your Social Security benefits. This is not true. You can it's sort of the money that you earn after retirement only affects your Social Security benefit if you're under the full retirement age. So for me, I know my full retirement age is going to be 67. So if at 63 I decide I'd retire and I decide to work because I have to, I get penalized. I think I'll get $1 withheld from my benefits for every 2 that I earn above a certain limit. I think the limit is for 2022, it's 19,000 and change, 19,500, something like that. If I am set to retire in, say, 2022, well, until my retirement actually takes effect in that year, I'm actually penalized even less. I think $1 is taken out for every 3 and that I earn, and I think the limit is 52,000. So the point is that you can earn money. You will be penalized for the years until you are actually retired. But then once you've reached retirement age, which for me is 67, I can continue to work, and there's no, I won't be penalized at all. So you can see people do work, and it's fine. The fourth myth I want to talk about is that the Social Security benefits are not taxable. Oops, they are taxable. It depends on your total income pie. So I'm not going to go into the weeds here because it's quite complicated, but you can either be taxed not at all, depending on how much other income you have coming in. You can be taxed at 50% of your Social Security. Let's say, let me give you an example. So let's say I get $1,000 a month for Social Security. Well, if I don't make any other income, none of that is taxed. If I make income above a certain limit, then 50% of my 1,000 is taxed. So 500 is taxed. If I make income above a higher limit, then 85% of my 1,000 is taxed. So 850 is taxed. So, and then so you're either, I'll be taxed, $500 will be taxed, or 850 will be taxed, depending. So it's hard to not be taxed at all because you have to really have almost no money. However, not all of your Social Security benefits will be taxable. So I just assumed everybody knows about how to qualify for Social Security, but let me just, in case, because it's sometimes complicated, in case there's any doubt, you're qualified for Social Security if you accumulate enough workers' credits over the course of your working life. You need 40 credits. So you can earn up to 4 credits a year. And each credit is, you need to make $1,510, I think, for each credit. So, and once you've accumulated 40 credits, you qualify for everything. So just so you know, that's how Social Security works. Oops,
So Elizabeth, what you're saying is that in getting engaged in Social Security and saving for Social Security, that happens as a function of the job that you go in, different jobs that you're going into, and there's a certain amount of money that is taken out of your paycheck and put into the Social Security coffers for you to then pick up the benefit when you become of the appropriate age in your 60s.
Yes, and if you are self-employed, you pay specific Social Security taxes. There's an extra tax levied on you as an independent worker that funds Social Security in lieu of your company doing it for you. So yes, so
And one other quick question before we leave that was in the chat that I think is important, if you could just define it. There was a question on what is a pension? You know, when you were describing the sources of income, and there was this question that came up around, you know, what are pensions?
pensions are defined benefit plans. So there are two kinds of plans for retirement that companies can sponsor. There's a defined contribution plan and a defined benefit plan. So a defined contribution plan, we will be talking about those in more detail. Those are your 401ks and your 403bs. And the reason they're called defined contribution plans is because your employer is contributing to the plan. And that's the guarantee, right? The guarantee is that the employer is going to contribute something to your plan. A defined benefit plan is what is guaranteed is how much you're going to get when you retire. So it's not the contribution that's guaranteed, it's how much you're going to get. So that is really what it's a different kind of retirement plan. It used to be very popular until it got very expensive for companies to guarantee their employees certain amounts of benefits upon retirement. And so kind of in the 60s and 70s, I think it was that somebody came up with the idea of 401ks, defined contribution plans, which took a lot of the burden off of companies and shifted the burden of saving to individuals, right? Because with the pension, you don't have to save; they save for you. With with your 401ks and your 403bs, you need to put something in there so that you get what the employer is going to match. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so employer sponsored retirement plans. Here we go. These are, there's so much detail, and I don't think we're going to go into huge detail with these, but I'll just explain what they are and what are some of the basics around them. So you have these 5 basic employee sponsored, these are defined contribution plans, right? So you join a company, and if it's a nonprofit, you're going to get a 403b offered to you. If it's a private or if it's a public for-profit corporation, you're going to get a 401k offered. If it's state and local government, more than likely you'll get a 457 offered to you. I'll speak about the steps and the simples in a minute. So with these 3, which are very similar, you have employee contribution limits. So if I'm working at Coca-Cola and I have a 401k, the maximum that I can put in there in 1 year is $20,500. These are the limits for 2022. They change every year. They increase every year, right? If I'm above 50 plus, then I can do catch-up payments of an extra $6,500. So the total amount of money that I'm allowed to put into these plans is $2,700. A 403b, the limits are slightly lower. 1950, but again, it's a 6,500 catch-up, and the same thing for a 457B. So that's those. A SEP and a simple, what are they? SEPs are for self-employed people like me. I'm self-employed, and if I can go and open up a SEP, set up a SEP, which is very simple and doesn't really cost much. 401ks, 403bs, and 457bs are actually quite costly to administer for companies, which is a lot of times why small companies, small businesses don't offer them, because they're actually quite expensive. A SEP is really very simple, and a simple is also really very simple. The difference is simples can be opened for small businesses that have less than 100 employees, and SEPs are generally speaking for businesses that are 1, 2, 3 people, and often they're family members, small family-owned businesses. There are no employee contribution limits for a SEP. For a simple, the most you can contribute is 14,000, and you can do a catch-up of 2,500. Let's see, for withdrawals. So those are so I've explained the eligible employees for each and the contribution limits. The rest of it, withdrawals, okay. So you can withdraw from these various plans without penalty after the age of 59 and a half. If you try to do that before, you're going to get a 10% penalty on whatever you withdraw. So these plans are set up really to incentivize long-term retirement savings, and disincentivize using your savings for anything else. RMDs, required minimum distributions, need to start at the age of 72, so you can keep contributing to your plans forever and ever and ever and ever. But at a certain point, you're going to have to start taking out, and that age is 72. Taxation. We'll talk a little bit more about taxation later, but the wonderful, really wonderful feature of these plans is that they're tax deductible. What does that mean? It means that the company, for the 401ks, the 403bs, and the 457s, the company takes whatever money you tell them to take out, right, before you get your paycheck, right? So you get money, so the money that goes in has not been taxed, okay? So it goes in pre-tax. As it grows in the account, those gains, the taxes on those gains are deferred. You don't pay them every year. And when you do take the money out, when you start withdrawing at 72 or before, between 59 and a half to 72, you will be taxed like ordinary income tax. So that is one of the we'll talk about that particular feature later. But it's important to remember that you're going to be taxed as though it's ordinary income, because it is ordinary income, because you haven't been taxed on it before. The employer match, you can see I put stars only because for the 401k, 403b, and 457b, the matches are up to the employer, and they vary widely. And so sometimes an employer will say, I will match 2% up to 50% of your salary or something like that. It can be quite complicated, and so the first thing you need to do when you choose your retirement plan, if you get a choice, is figure out what the match is. For the SEPs and the simples, I won't really go into it, but there are no real matches. The simple, you can match either 3% or 2% depending on the year. Since you're self-employed, for the SEPs, you can put in almost as much as you want, up to 58%.
So Elizabeth, can we jump into a little bit about the IRAs now that we've learned a bit about the 401ks, 403bs, 457s and SEPs?
So, absolutely. Individual retirement accounts are the equivalent retirement accounts, but opened by individuals, not by your companies. So we have two different kinds of individual accounts. We have a Roth and a traditional. Again, we'll talk more about Roth IRAs in the next slide, I think. But what I will say here about these type of accounts is that they are simply accounts. As they're named, these are not investment accounts. These are retirement savings accounts. And when you open a Roth or a traditional IRA, it is really your responsibility to invest the money that you are putting into it. I have sadly come across people who have not understood that. And so they open an individual retirement account and put money in every month, every year, but they fail to take the next step, which is to actually invest that money. So then it becomes a glorified savings account. So I say that right up front. So what is a Roth? What is the difference? Well, the biggest difference is the tax treatment. Okay, so a traditional IRA, like your 401ks, you get a tax deduction in the year that you contribute. So you're not paying taxes on it in the year you're putting it in. The earnings are tax deferred, and when you withdraw, you owe ordinary income taxes. The tax treatment for the Roth IRA is what really distinguishes it and what really makes the Roth IRA a very, very strong savings vehicle for retirement. You put the money in post-tax, not pre-tax. So you don't get a tax deduction for the contribution. The earnings are tax-free, and then the withdrawals in retirement are also tax-free. So in fact, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So in fact, it's a different way of organizing your taxes. So when a Roth IRA, when you retire and you have $100,000 in your Roth account, you start taking those out and you're not paying taxes on them. Whereas in a traditional IRA, you have $100,000. However, you're taking that out and you're paying taxes. I guess I will say one thing about that. People will often say, yeah, but if I've put in to a traditional IRA money before tax, pre-tax, that means there's more money going in there and there's more money growing every year. That's true, because if you're putting in money post-tax in a Roth, that means you've already paid taxes on it. So there's less money to go in. So in theory, you have more money growing in your traditional IRA every year, and you have perhaps less money growing in your Roth IRA. However, what you need to figure out is it worth it to have more money growing because you're going to be paying ordinary income tax, which is the highest possible kind of tax you can pay? Or is it worth paying your taxes now as you go along, as you put it in, and having no tax to pay? Then I will show you a slide that will compare the two and make that a little clearer. Let's see. There are contribution limits, $6,000 per year. You get an extra 1,000 if you're 50 plus as a catch-up. There are income limits. This is the big thing. One of the big differences between 401ks and the IRAs is that some people make too much money to put into IRAs. So a traditional IRA, actually, there are no income limits, technically. However, there are income limits on the amount you can put in that is deductible. right? That is deductible. So in other words, so you can see here, if I'm single and I want to put money into a traditional IRA, I can put lots and lots and lots of money in there. However, only $68,000 to $78,000 is going to be tax deductible. And so it's anything below 68 is fully deductible, and then anything between 68 and 78 is reduced deduction, right? It becomes a reduced benefit. And it's the same thing with the married filing jointly, same thing with the Roth. You can see the Roth contributions seem higher, but the Roth is a hard stop. In other words, if I'm a single person and I want to put into a Roth, I have to make less than $144,000. So if I make less than $129,000, I can put in the entire $6,000. If I make between 129 and 144, my benefit is reduced and I can only put in reduced amounts. So, the biggest drawback, I think, to Roths in particular is that you get priced out if you make too much money. Oops, sorry. Let's see. One of the wonderful things about IRAs is that with a Roth, whatever you put in, you can always withdraw tax-free and penalty-free whenever you like. So that's a great thing. I mean, the earnings are tax-free only if you've met the two conditions of a Roth, which is you've held the account for 5 years and you're over 59 and a half. So let me say that again. So there's two types of money gathering in your accounts. One of them are your contributions. Every month you're putting in money, so that becomes your cost basis. And then the other tranche of money are all the earnings you're making on that, right? Compounding returns. And so you can always, whenever you like, take out money from your contributions, from your cost basis, no penalty, tax-free. The earnings, if you're taking money out that belong in that tranche, then you have to meet the minimum requirement of 5 years and 59 and a half. So, and I guess I'll just mention quickly, both have extra benefits. You can take out $10,000 of earnings with no penalty if you're a first-time home buyer. And there is a whole list of qualified education and hardship withdrawals that you can also take out with no penalty. In a Roth, it needs to be after 5 years and 59. And some of those things include medical, like unreimbursed medical expenses, disability, unemployment, adoption. There's a whole list of things that really that you can take money out for without penalty. So this is a huge benefit of the IRAs. All right, I'm going to move on because I'd like to talk a little bit more about Roths. So, Roths have sort of become the retirement vehicle par excellence. And I'm going to ask Albert in a minute to share with us what his experience has been with Roths. But let me go on ahead and just get through this slide. And then Albert, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, awesome. So what you can see here, I love this slide. First of all, the first thing is that if you have children, you can have them you can open up Roths for those children if they have part-time jobs. The only qualification that you need to put money into a Roth is earned income. So if your daughter is mowing lawns for all the neighbors and your son is babysitting, then earned income. So this chart, this graph, what it does is it shows the power of investing in a Roth starting at different ages. So if you're age 15, let's say that you are making enough money to put in $3,000 a year. So that would be, let's see, a Roth is 6,000, so that's 500 a month. So let's just say $250 a month is going into your Roth starting age 15. Once you, and so you can see how much money that becomes at the age of 70. I mean, this is what's so powerful about this. Like, this, of course, assumes that there's nothing taken out. It assumes, I think, a rate of 7%. Yeah, a rate of return of 7%, which is the average rate of return of equity investments in the market, between 7 and 8%. Let's see. Yes, it says here, the ending values don't reflect taxes, fees, or inflation. The amounts would be lower, but this is just hypothetical to give you an idea of how powerful it is to start investing even little amounts as early as you possibly can. If you have started at age 25, you're putting in, let's say, $6,000 a year, which is 500 a month. And at age 70, you end up with 2 million instead of 3 million. That 10-year difference is enormous between 15 and 25. If you start at 35 and you're putting in 6,000, you end up with 1 million. That's enormous. The difference is just enormous. And then if you start at age 45, you can see even then your savings grow to almost $500,000. So it's not negligible. And I have worked with people who only have ever contributed to a Roth and nothing else, and they do beautifully. So Albert, I'm excited to know, because you're 22, and I want to know, please, or everybody wants to know, how is it that you got into Roth investing and how has it gone for you?
Sure. So I got into Roth investing after I got my first job when I was 15. I always thought that it would be a really good, powerful like saving tool. As an intern, you don't really have access to any kind of 401k. So the Roth was the next best option. And the way I would approach, saving 6,000 a year to try and meet that goal was, besides my formal job, I'd also work any kind of additional side hobby to earn some cash and also contribute in that sense. As a college student, you should be aware of some of the expenses that you have, and it kind of leads us back to the first webinar we host. But being able to understand where you stand financially and then adjusting your plan is, also a really good approach to Roth investing. Main thing I like to keep in mind was just, thinking about, what kind of income was necessary for me to just pay off my expenses. And then thinking about, okay, so I have this additional sum that I could either put in a bank account that would give me less than 1% of return every year, or I could put it into a diversified portfolio for my Roth and really just make the most of the market.
Albert, how did you know to open up a Roth at age 15? Because at age 15, well, they didn't exist when I was 15, sadly, but I would never have known. How did you know?
Yeah, so when I was 15, I had a great high school teacher who told me about these different investment accounts, and he always told me that even if you can't contribute the maximum amount, $1,000 today, 40, 50 years down the line will be a very substantial amount, assuming that you're growing 10% every year.
10%. And so, Albert, are you growing 10%? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so that's a great question. You definitely have years like last year where you grow more than 10% a year, and then you have years like this year where you're down probably 15%. But the overall kind of average has been about 10%, and that's something that was really exciting to me to see money double over time. And I think generally speaking, the power of the Roth is just the time being on our side and being able to think about things in the long term.
Awesome. Well, you stay there because I'm going to ask you some questions in our next slide. Okay. So this slide is just some quick housekeeping, really. I wanted to make the point again that when you open these accounts, when you start contributing to your 401k or to your Roth or your traditional IRA, it's really important to understand that you are responsible for investing the money in those accounts. Now, with an employer 401k, the employer will offer you a whole series of mostly funds, mutual funds, index funds, target date funds, and somebody in human resources will say, well, just check this and check this, right? So that it is more than likely that you will be invested. But with a Roth and with a traditional, there's no human resources telling you to check this and check this, and so you must take responsibility for investing. So, what kinds of things can you invest in? As we know, you can invest in stocks and bonds, derivatives. Stocks and bonds are they're wonderful because they're fun, right? If you're into the market, you love reading about different investments in different companies. Stocks and bonds, are lots of fun. However, you need to be interested in the market. You need to be disciplined. You need to be someone who knows how to do their research. You need to be, willing to take the time to do the kind of research it takes to choose well. So if you are someone like Albert, who's very interested in investing and who likes to maintain a lot of control over his portfolio, stocks and bonds are great. If you're someone more like me, who really is not going to pay attention every single day. I don't know if you pay attention every day, Albert. I hope you don't, but I like the ease and the diversification, the automatic diversification that comes with mutual funds. So mutual funds and index funds, what are they? Well, an index fund essentially is a basket of stocks that mirrors an index. So if you have the S&P 500 and you have all the different companies that are in the S&P 500, an S&P 500 index fund is going to mirror the S&P 500. What is great about that? Well, it's kind of just like a computer, right? That attempts to match the index and keep costs low. I think the con about index funds is that they're not well diversified. They're simply mirroring an index. So you generally need to invest in a variety of index funds to get yourself somewhat diversified. Mutual funds, on the other hand, they're a lot more convenient. They usually have higher fees, and a lot of people complain about mutual funds because you're going to pay higher in fees than index funds, for example. For me, it's worth it. Because I want something that is automatically well diversified. I want something that is actively managed, and therefore it is automatically rebalanced. We talked about these things in our last session, the rebalancing that is so necessary, the diversification that is so necessary. You get all of that automatically in a mutual fund. You have less control than you would over individual stocks and bonds, but more predictable returns. So there are trade-offs for the different ways to invest the money in your Roth, for example. And I'm going to talk about target date funds. I don't have any target date funds, but I work with many people who do. They are absolutely by far the most convenient funds to invest in. They also will offer you the least amount of control and fairly predictable returns over the long term. What is a target date fund? A target date fund is most likely what you will be offered with your 401k or your 403b. They are funds, they're actually funds of funds. It's like one umbrella fund, and there are lots of different funds within it. That's called a fund of funds. And that will automatically diversify your investments based on when you plan to retire. So I won't say much more now because we're going to talk about it in the next slide. But what I wanted to know, Albert, what what are your favorite things to invest in with your 401k?
Yeah, so generally speaking, my 401k is just filled with your standard Vanguard mutual funds. However, thinking about what we spoke about earlier with Roth IRAs, it's also good to mention things called exchange traded funds. Exchange traded funds are essentially, these things called ETFs, and they're very similar to your index fund and mutual fund. The only difference is that they're a lot more liquid and they have a lot lower kind of cost to investing in them. And when I say liquid, I mean, being able to sell off the security in a really short amount of time. And just generally, I think it's great to just focus on your risk appetite and then determine, what things you want to invest in there.
So
And
thanks for
let me
bringing.
just for one sec, this is Annie. Just let me jump in. We're about 10 minutes shy of the Q&A session. So as we go forward, just wanted to make sure everybody got their questions in for you, Elizabeth. So we're just asking the group if there's other questions that you'd like us to focus on in the question session, please put them in chat.
Okay, great. Albert, ETFs are, we won't talk about them in detail now, but I'm very glad you brought them up. And Albert, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. And would you say that would you prefer ETFs to, say, mutual funds?
Yeah, so I think, I definitely have a preference for ETFs, but I know a lot of 401k plans, they restrict you to mutual funds. But in general, I think ETFs have a lot lower, fee. The big thing to consider when you're looking at ETFs is the expense ratio. And, even though 1% expenses right now may seem, very marginal, think about this in the long term, it can really add up and be a big difference maker.
Great. Okay, thanks, Albert. Okay, so these are target date funds. And okay, so this slide, what I would like to point out are two things. First, target date funds, as we've said, automatically will diversify your portfolio according to your retirement date. So there's a lot, so it's very convenient actually, because somebody else does this work for you. In this graph, you can see anything in blue is equity, essentially. Large cap, mid cap, small cap, international, and anything in sort of yellow brown is a fixed income, vehicle. And what I think is important to notice is that all the way to the left, you have a retirement fund dated for 2060. So if someone is going to retire in 2060, they're in 45 years. You can they're probably in their 20s. And again, in 2055, 2050, these people retiring in these years are generally in their 20s and 30s. And what I want you to notice is that this is the time that you should be the most aggressive in your portfolios. I would recommend, and I think standard recommendations really are, that you keep about 90% minimum of equity in your portfolios at this stage. And you can kind of see the blue really dominates in those years. Once you hit, say, your 40s and 50s, I recommend, and I think it's you can see in the graph here, maintaining between 70 and 90%, depending on your risk appetite, still in equities. When you're in your 60s and 70s, you would maintain between 45 and 65, again, depending on your risk appetite. And what I'd like you to notice at the very end of the slide, at the very end of the graph, you can see that even post-retirement, so in year zero, retirement in 2015, so the slide was made in 2015, right? You can see that there is still quite a bit of equity, even into 10 years past retirement. So let's say you retire at 70. At age 80, you still have about 30% equity in your retirement account. And I think that this is something that surprises people, but I think it's critical because inflation never stops. And the best hedge for inflation, we'll talk about inflation in a bit, is equity. And if you don't keep enough equity in your portfolio throughout your lifetime, you're not keeping up with inflation. So not all target date funds are equal. This is a quick slide for you to see. This was in 2014. The slide is in 2014, and I deliberately chose a slide that is no longer really relevant. But what I want you to understand from this slide about your target date funds is that they're not all the same. You can see that all of these different companies, which are very well-known companies, have all created a 2025 target date fund for someone who's retiring in 2025. But you can see that at the top, American Funds has 75% of equity in their portfolio, whereas on the bottom you have John Hancock that has only 51% of equity in the fund. So that is a huge difference. It's a huge difference in the amount of equity and in the fund. And so you need to make really smart choices when you're choosing your target date funds. You can see that there are differences in the fees, the fee structure, and also in the returns. So those differences, so not all target date funds, you can't just pick one and think it's like the best one. You need to really dig in a little bit and figure out what the asset allocations are and what the fees are. Okay, so this is so taxation on investment gains is something that is a cornerstone concept for retirement planning. This is known as the 3 buckets of taxation. The first bucket is tax me now. Then the next one is tax me later. Then the next one is tax me never. And tax me now is the bucket where you have all of the money that is being taxed as you go. So the money in your checking and savings accounts, when you have interest, that's taxed. CDs, mutual funds, stocks and bonds, so all of your market investments, those are taxed, as you know. Annuities, real estate, it's all taxed now. Tax me later are all the plans that we've been talking about. Your simples, your SEPs, your 401ks, the pensions, which is the defined benefit plan, right? Those are tax deferred. And then in the third bucket, tax me never, well, it's a little bit of a misnomer because it's never tax me never, right? You have to pay taxes, but these are the ones where you pay the taxes up front and you're funding these vehicles with post-tax money so that your taxes, your gains are not taxed and your withdrawals are not taxed. And this is a critical, these buckets are an important way to conceive of your tax planning strategy when you're retiring. And we'll talk about it a little more later. Power of tax deferred growth is, I wanted to show you how important it is because we keep talking about tax deferred, right? As opposed to taxable. And I had mentioned earlier when I talked about the difference between a traditional IRA and a Roth IRA that some people would say, well, you can have more money if it's tax deferred. So you can see here with a $100,000 investment, okay, what they're showing you is the difference between how much you would have if it were in a tax deferred account versus how much you would have in 30 years if it were in a taxable account, an account that you had paid taxes on, you can see there's a significant difference of about $324,000 between the two. We're assuming a 7% annual growth rate, and we're assuming a 28% income tax rate over 30 years. That's a big, big difference of how much money you can accumulate in a tax deferred account as opposed to a taxable account. What you need to think about, though, is at a 28% federal income tax rate, how much of that $761,000 is actually yours and how much of it is Uncle Sam's, and measure that against the taxable amount and see what the difference is. So here is I think the wisest strategy for dealing with these three buckets. I have here two couples, the Smiths and the Jones. They each have $150,000 in income for in retirement. They both saved well, and they have $150,000 per year coming in. The Smiths saved all of their money. They put all of their retirement savings into tax deferred accounts. And the Joneses instead split it 50-50. So let's just say they put 50% in a 401k and they put 50% in a Roth or other tax advantaged accounts. Why is that important? Well, you can see on the left, the Smiths are going to be paying 22% taxes. We're just assuming a tax bracket relative to their income, which means that, well, I guess it says here that was what they would have paid in 2018, which means that they owe almost $25,000 on their income, on their retirement income. Because the Joneses split their money between a tax deferred and a tax advantage account, what happens is that the tax rate that they're charged is 12%, because they're only paying taxes on half, on $75,000. The rest of it comes out of a tax-free Roth account, which means that they're only paying $8,600. So you can see at the very end, the Joneses have $141,000 to spend, and the Smiths only have $125,000. So that's why in the last slide I said, yeah, you can accumulate more in a tax deferred account, but how much of that is actually yours? Because you're going to owe taxes on it. So this is a powerful slide, and I hope that it's helpful for you to think about how to diversify your retirement income. This is one of the last slides. I've only got two more. This one is about inflation. So what about inflation? I think, inflation is never going to go away, and we're feeling the effects of inflation now. It's quite painful. Groceries. I just went in yesterday and bought a pot of yogurt at my local convenience store here, and it cost me $8. I almost collapsed at the register. But this is, I believe that this is not structural. I think this is temporary. But nevertheless, inflation is real, and usually financial advisors use about a 3% inflation rate when they're adjusting for returns. So you can see, I want to show you here what it means, the effects, like how does inflation eat away at your money? It eats away at your purchasing power, at how much your money can buy. So if today you have $100, okay, it's worth $100, and you go out and you buy, I don't know how many yogurts for $100. Not so many yogurts as I could last year, but anyway, in 10 years, that $100 you can see in the dark blue is only going to be worth $74. So I'm only going to be able to buy $74 worth of yogurts, not $100 worth of yogurts in 10 years. And in order to buy as many yogurts as I did today, I would have to have $134. to maintain the same purchasing power, I'm going to have $134. Look at 40 years. In 40 years, my $100 is only going to be worth 31. So I would go into the store and only be able to buy $31 worth of yogurts. That's not much yogurt. And if I wanted to buy as many yogurts as I did today, I would need to have $326 in order to buy the same amount of yogurt that I did today. So inflation is real. It over time, it really diminishes the how much you can buy with your money, which is why keeping your money in savings accounts is really detrimental, because every year what you've got in your savings account, even though it looks like it's the same, it's actually less. Okay, this is our last slide. So this is the a investment strategy that I use for myself and for anybody who asks me. I always say we've got our 3 buckets here. We've got our taxable bucket, which is our savings accounts, our stocks, our bonds, as we know. And it's important to know that our emergency fund goes into this bucket. So it's really important. I say fund this bucket to the most that you can. We need to have, it's tempting to think that we want to put everything into the tax-free bucket. But the reality is that a well-diversified investment strategy necessitates that you have money in all 3. Why? You need very liquid funds available. Those are going to be your savings accounts, right? Money market funds, things that you can tap into immediately for an emergency fund. I think 3 months is fine, but anywhere between 3 and 6 months of income should be in this bucket as an emergency fund. So until you develop your emergency fund, you should be putting the most money you can afford into creating that. And you should be putting the most money you can afford into your investments, your mutual funds, all of that, into regular brokerage accounts. That's why I say on top, it's brokerage accounts, which is just your regular investments, and your emergency savings. That's bucket number 1. Fund that to the most that you can afford. Bucket number 2 is your tax deferred bucket. That's your 401ks, your IRAs, etc. I would say these should be funded to the match. So if it's a 401k or 403b, make sure that you are funding it enough to get all of the money that your employer is going to give you to match what you have put in. It's free money, and nowhere else are you going to get free money. You do not want to miss free money. But beyond that, I would argue that you might find better returns outside of those employer sponsored plans. We talked a bit about the target date funds, and the target date funds don't always give you the best returns. So I always say fund that to the match and put the rest into your savings account, into your stocks and bonds, or into your savings account until you've had your emergency fund. The third bucket, your tax-free bucket, that seems a little bit confusing, but I'll explain it in a minute. This is your tax-free bucket. We've already talked about your Roth IRA. Roth 401k, some companies offer it. It's a regular 401k. However, they've created a Roth alternative, and it means that you can put money in post-tax. So you wouldn't be getting a tax deduction. You'd be putting in post-tax. So I have a Roth 401k, for example, because I want to pay my taxes now, not later. A Roth conversion, quite simply, is people who have traditional IRAs or 401ks, and they want to convert that into a Roth. It is possible. And a LERP, I won't go into details, but I put up on top of VUL and a LERP. Those are both 2 different types of cash value life insurance. Life insurance is one of those vehicles that that are tax-free. And a VUL in particular is a variable universal life insurance policy, which is a type of LIRP, which is life insurance retirement plan. And a VUL allows you to have insurance and invest your monthly premium payments in the market. So it is, in fact, a mutual fund or a series of mutual funds wrapped in an insurance package that allows you to invest in the market tax-free. If you have questions about VULs, LIRPs, Roth conversions, all this stuff, just reach out. I'm happy to talk to you about it.
We have a series of questions that have been posed in the chat that we would like to answer. In terms of the big question, how do you go about figuring out what you need for retirement? What's the best way to do that?
Okay, so I'll go over this again because it's really important, and this is the kind of work, it can be done on your own if you're very enterprising, and there are plenty of online resources and calculators that help figure this stuff out. The general approach is, first thing is you figure out how much money you think you're going to need in retirement, realistically. So if you make $100,000 a year and you live comfortably on that, then you can think, well, what are my expenses going to be like? How are they going to change in retirement? Are they going to be the same? Am I going to live differently? So what I mean by that is, if I make $100,000 today and I'm 30 years old, well, my medical expenses are probably fairly low. Maybe I go out a lot, I dine out a lot, I go to concerts, I go to movies, maybe I travel a lot. I don't know what my lifestyle would be like, but I can promise you that when I'm 70, the one thing that I know is going to be more expensive are my healthcare costs. So, and I probably will slow down a bit. I don't know, maybe I'll travel differently. But these are the sorts of questions that you need to sort of sit down and really think about when you think about how much of your income you want to replace in retirement. So let's just say I want to replace 80% of my income. So I think I can live comfortably in retirement with $80,000 a year. So now I've got that number. And I do that the good old fashioned way of just really doing a granular budget and figuring out how much it costs for my haircuts and how much it costs for my manicures, for example, and then inflating that by, say, 3% every year, so that you get a really detailed picture of what you might need. Let's just say 80,000 is good for me. And then what I do is I calculate backwards. If I have it, say I'm 30, let's say I have another 35 years worth of working life, which means I'm going to be making, let's say, $100,000 times 35 years, okay, in the course of my working life. And so how much of that am I going to have to save each month in order to reach my 80,000, right, times 30? See, because if I need 80,000 a year, what I'm going to need in my total retirement, I would plan until 90. So 65 to 90, that's 25 years, right? 60 to 90 is 30 years. So you want to plan out a good 25 or 30 years worth of your 80,000, right? And this is not money today, it's money tomorrow. So you have to figure out the future value of your 80,000 for those 30 years. And then you come up with a total number. Then you come up with, oh, I need 3 million total. So if I need 3 million total, I bring that back to today. these are financial calculations that you do with a financial calculator, or you have a financial advisor who does these things. That's what financial advisors do. And then you figure, okay, so based on that total number, 3 million, let's say, I need to then save X amount every month starting today, and I need to earn this much return on it to make my goal. So, it's kind of hard to talk about in the abstract, but that's the process. And the good old fashioned way is doing it with a financial calculator. There are obviously many software programs that financial advisors use to calculate this. And then I know when I work with people, I do a lot of Monte Carlo simulations. And so I say, okay, so let's say I need to save $5,000 a month. Let's say, well, what if I save 4,000? Well, what does that look like? What if I save 5,500? What does that look like? It's important to build in some flexibility in your retirement planning, because one doesn't know what's going to happen in the next 30 years, right? But I hope that gives you a general sense of some of the thought process behind figuring out how much do I need.
I think that's very, very helpful. And thank you very much, Elisabeth. In terms of some other questions that have come up from our chat, one of the ones that came up, and this is a topic that there's a lot written on it, even the person who wrote the 4% rule, it says, you can also use the 4% rule. It's a pretty good rule of thumb. I think there's a lot of discussion right now on the 4% rule, depending on what you have in holdings and depending on the situation. So I'm going to turn that over to you and just ask you to explore that a little bit for us.
It's controversial, the 4% rule. I think that a lot of people today think that 4% is not, it's not accurate and it's not enough. So do I use it? I don't. But I mean, this is the work I do. I try to calculate quite specifically. And as opposed to using shortcuts like the 4% rule. I think of the 4% rule as akin to like the rule of 72. These are shortcuts to figuring out how much you need and how much you can take out, which works as a rule of thumb, but I certainly wouldn't create a financial plan around retirement based on it.
In terms here, another question that has come from the audience, can we discuss VULs more and how to effectively get cash life insurance?
Sure. So cash life insurance is different than term, right? There's term and there's permanent. Term is where you get the insurance and you pay it every month, and then when you die, somebody gets the death benefit and it's tax-free. Cash life insurance or permanent life insurance is where it's much more expensive. So you get a much smaller death benefit for a higher premium, but that premium gets saved in an account, and that account is invested in risk-free or very close to risk-free bonds. And it's like a savings account. So it'll grow at an IRR of about 3% if you keep it for 30 years, 2 to 3%. So your cash value grows quite slowly, but it grows, and you can take loans against that at any point in time. And the interest rate on those loans tends to be quite low. That's a regular permanent cash value. Life insurance, a VUL, which is my favorite kind of life insurance, is a variable universal life. And so what is that? Essentially, it looks and feels very similar to a cash value policy. It's also expensive. in the sense that you get a smaller death benefit for a larger premium. So to give you a relative sense of what I mean, with term life insurance, you can get $1 million, let's say, in a death benefit and pay $40 a month for it. And you'll have that for 20 years or 30 years. And then at the end of that time, if you haven't died, well, the policy is finished. But if you have died before then your beneficiaries get the 1 million, right? So it's actually a very cost-effective way of insuring your family, really. And I often recommend term life insurance for that reason. Cash value, I'll give you the same, just so you can see. If you're going to pay $40 a month for a cash value policy, that's going to get you about $25,000 worth of death benefit. So you can see the difference in pricing. A VUL means the difference between a VUL and a regular permanent policy is that a VUL, the premiums you're paying are actually invested in the market. They're not put into a savings account. They're put into what's called a separate account. And you are responsible as the policy holder for choosing your investments. And the different life insurance companies will offer you a whole different variety of investment options, just like your 401k. I don't think they offer you they don't offer you target funds because that's specific to retirement, but they offer mutual funds, index funds, bonds, stocks. They offer all sorts of things. And you, as a policyholder, then will either work with your advisor to create a portfolio, you create it yourself. And each time you pay a premium every month, that premium is going into the market. Now, a couple of things to remember about VULs. First, they're expensive. You're paying for the privilege of investing in the market tax-free, because guess what? Your gains are tax-free, and so is your death benefit tax-free. So a lot of very wealthy people invest millions, billions in VULs. But lots of normal people like us also invest in VULs. And it's because in that third bucket, that tax me never bucket, that is one of the very attractive options. So yeah, so that's what a VUL is. It's kind of a way of investing in the market tax-free. And so you pay for that. The insurance fees are high enough. You know, it averages out to about 1.5 to maybe to 2.5%, which, as Albert mentioned, doesn't seem like a lot today, but over time that is quite a bit. However, you have to remember that it's not just a brokerage account, it's actually insurance. So you actually have a death benefit that is growing as well. So it's a great vehicle. And yeah, so I hope that answers the question.
Well, that was the last question for the evening based on our chat questions. So we've covered the various questions in chat. So on behalf of the group, I'd like to say thank you for joining us tonight, and a big thank you to the panelists and co-sponsors of this event, Elisabeth, Albert, the Yale Club of Washington, D.C., the Latino Alumni Network, the Yale Fin and alumni and students, 1stGen DC chapter, Barb Portaccio, our lead, and also Liz Chapman, and also Folake. So I wanted to say thank you to you all for and our participants for spending time tonight exploring with us how to save for retirement. Thank you so much. And this is the close of our series.